Welcome, and thanks for joining me. Today I will be presenting material I have compiled while reading a book I thoroughly enjoyed called Hacking School Discipline: 9 Ways to Create a Culture of Empathy and Responsibility Using Restorative Justice. This book is a part of the Hacking series by 10 Publications. As a disclaimer, I feel it is my duty to express that I do not own any rights to this material and cannot distribute this material. I will simply be stating my own thoughts along with quotes from the book that I have collected while reading. The co-authors of this book are Nathan Maynard and Brad Weinstein. Maynard studied behavioral neuroscience at Purdue University before spending over 10 years assisting youth via restorative practices. He is currently an administrator and dean of culture at Purdue Polytechnic High School. Weinstein has received a BA in teaching at Purdue University, M.Ed in teaching and instruction, and completed a principal licensure program. He was a coach and STEM department chairholder for 11 years and a principal for 2. He created the popular educational account titled At Teacher Goals. He is currently an administrator and director of curriculum and instruction at Purdue Polytechnic High School Network. Let's dive in. Throughout history, punitive school disciplinary measures have been more commonly used, gradually becoming less severe but showing no lasting positive effect when compared to restorative practices. Based on data in the book from years 2011 through 2012, suspensions and expulsions were extremely commonplace and seemed to be discriminatory toward minority groups as well. Unlike its punitive and unsuccessful counterpart, the goal of restorative discipline is to change the school climate rather than merely respond to student behavior. Restorative justice is based on the idea that students are not inherently bad or troubled. This method aims to find and address the root causes to misbehavior and focuses more on the student and their needs, while still holding them accountable. Another important distinction is that restorative practices treat misbehavior as one would a learning deficiency. Restorative practices help a number of different issues, from reducing crime to promoting positive leadership skills. Hacking School Discipline demonstrates a need for restorative practices in schools by stating that time spent disciplining students takes away from the primary reason many of us went into teaching: to help kids learn and grow. If you ask teachers what their favorite part about their job is, I guarantee they would not say disciplining students. However, this is a regular part of teaching, and it does not seem to be decreasing as a result of the current system. As a matter of fact, more than half of teachers interviewed from all grade levels stated that they had seen an increase in negative behaviors since they began teaching. Obviously, a change of some sort needs to take place. Now, I know that change is difficult, and sometimes it's easier and less painstaking to stick with the current system, but it is not working. Hacking provides us with 9 restorative practices to implement this change gradually into our interactions with children. Many times, while either working in school or being a student myself, I witnessed students getting in trouble. They were swiftly kicked out of class for wrongdoing and given their punishment without a chance to actually talk about their side of the situation. Occasionally, this resulted in further problems because the situation at hand was not even addressed. This brings us to our first problem, thus our first solution. Let's Hack focuses on addressing the issue promptly and appropriately with input from those involved. This is also witnessed by a group in order to teach effective mediation and build empathy among the entire group. it is important that the mediation is not treated like a punishment, but rather a conversation. Allowing students to state their perspective in the matter with a mediator present helps them feel the responsibility of the situation. This builds empathy and helps them see the gravity of the potential consequences of their actions. Empathy often comes from a common understanding and a relating to one another. They can then be a part of their punishment decision, which can be effective in making them feel more accountable in these consequences. The Let's Talk script is a way to play detective and get to the bottom of the issue at hand. The main focuses of this are figuring out what happened, the emotions or thought patterns that led to this, as well as who was affected and how. You can tweak this as you see fit for the situation at hand. The script provided is only a part of the restorative mediation that is to take place. The goals of this mediation are for those involved to build respect for the perspectives and emotions of others, build healthy relationships, and recognize their responsibility in both the issue and the consequences. Other goals, some that involve the facilitator more, are repairing the harm with meaningful and positive solutions in order to restore balance and being reintegrated back into the classroom respectfully and sensitively. Let's Talk asks you to focus on feelings. Page 20 of the book says instead of asking, "Was kicking over the trash can a good idea?" ask, "What was happening before you kicked over the trash can?" Give affirmations such as, "Thanks for sharing. That sounds upsetting." Another restorative question to help kickstart a plan of action could be, "How should we avoid this happening in the future?" Or, "How could you react differently to this negative emotion in the future?" Fill in those in the lives of the involved parties and bring them into the conversation as you deem necessary. Don't complain. Instead, praise the repair of the harm taking place by those involved. Record the behavior, mediation, and plan of action to track success of these mediations and determine what works and what doesn't. Summarize the mediation before dismissing the group. Integrate restorative language, such as statements involving the community that is your school and the need to keep it healthy and positive. Use these often with students and staff alike to prepare the facility for restorative practices. Mediations should be discussed afterward among staff members in order to provide feedback and constructive criticism to help eliminate bias and other observed issues. The steps within full implementation of Let's Talk are to round up all involved in the situation and explain the goals and values of the mediation. In a supportive environment, attempt to achieve said goals while allowing all to speak freely, but while observing restorative values and language. Give insight where it is due, and redirect conversation if it veers off course or toward negative and unhealthy territory. Summarize the situation and the consequences before dismissing the group. Follow up in order to ensure consequences have been met. Let's Talk in its entirety, as well as an open and positive classroom culture, helps to build therapeutic rapport. The second problem is that classroom issues are addressed and handled outside of the environment in which they took place. Unfortunately, the term handled does not mean resolved. This does little to hold students accountable for their actions and see the effect they have on others. This brings us to hack number 2, Circle Up. Circle Up provides students with a safe, respectful, and supportive environment to discuss problems or simply share feelings and ideas amongst their peers. It's important to reiterate that this is not just to be used for problems. It can also be used for general idea sharing or constructive conversations. Unlike Let's Talk, Circle Up is to be a regular part of class and can be done every day and take as little as 5 minutes. During Circle Ups, you, along with all students, are to sit together in a circle. You, acting as mediator, are to sit in on these sessions simply listening and directing or redirecting the conversation as needed. A good suggestion is to ask a check-in question, such as, "What is an interesting thing you learned yesterday?" You can also include mindfulness exercises in order to get students in the appropriate headspace to begin class and learning. Another important thing to keep in mind is that restorative practices center around the idea of respecting everyone. Ergo, provide students with the choice to opt out of the Circle Up. A Circle Up designed for specific issues goes the same as a regular, aside from a few key differences. The teacher's role as mediator is more defined, and they are to identify the key factors in the issue at hand. The teacher also is to direct discussion of the issue, emphasizing classroom expectations and how they are not being met. Allow students to share their experience of the issue and urge them to answer follow-up questions asked by you, the mediator. Students are in charge of holding one another accountable and suggesting how to repair the harm done. Solution and next steps are discussed before the group dissipates and quickly returns to normal lessons. Once students become well acquainted with Circle Ups, they can start holding their own, with you to merely observe and redirect if necessary. This is suggested to be done during the last 5 minutes of class. These are typically called to resolve issues of which you are unaware. The student calling the Circle Up is the facilitator, and they are to share the grievance at hand, asking others to comment. The goal of the conversation is finding a solution to the problem. You can ask questions or make statements to push them in that direction, like, "We are all a team and need to hold each other accountable. If you see someone doing something wrong, pull them aside and say something." The facilitator is to review concerns and propose solutions before closing the circle. As the mediator, ensure that classroom expectations are reiterated and reset. In order to implement Circle Ups, there is to be an area dedicated to these that feels safe and positive. Classroom expectations are to be clear and well established. Communication and empathy is emphasized as key parts of restorative practices. The circle always needs to be wrapped up with planned solutions and expectations in mind and clearly stated. Share your experiences with restorative circles with other teachers in an attempt to make them the norm. The steps to take for the Circle Ups are as simple as calling the circle, making sure everyone knows their time limits, talking through the problem at hand, and reviewing the action items. Everyone that is involved in the discussion must be involved in the solution. Make sure to follow up during next session to determine the success of the last proposed solution and whether or not a new approach needs to be taken. It has already been established through decades of studies that the punitive disciplinary options commonly used in schools are unsuccessful at decreasing negative behaviors. Although there are some positives that come from suspension or expulsion, there are many negatives, especially in the long haul. Thus producing hack number 3, repairing the harm. Repairing the harm is a restorative practice that requires that the restorative actions taken directly correlate to the harm done. The student chooses whether or not they want to be involved with the decision-making process, deciding how to repair the harm. When they are a part of this process, they feel more of an investment in it, and hearing the perspectives of the victim or those involved helps develop empathy. Like with other restorative practices, this relationship and empathy-focused method helps develop a stronger sense of community and belonging in the school. In order to implement repairing the harm, start by initiating conversation. Have you noticed a theme forming in these practices so far revolving around effective communication? Use open-ended questions and try to hear from all of those involved to find out the root of the issue at hand and the harm that was caused. If the student at fault is willing, confer with them to determine a course of action to repair the harm. Help the student follow through with the chosen solution. Revisiting the negative behavior can be done in collaboration with the parents. All steps of the process should be discussed during this, and participation should be praised. The student's feelings toward the process should also be discussed. Plan how to prevent repeating incidents of the negative behavior. When an incident occurs, address it one-on-one in very plain terms and use open-ended questions in an attempt to understand the reasoning or motives behind it. Direct but do not answer for the student. Respond with affirmations for responsive answers and taking responsibility. Think of it under the iceberg perspective, which states that any behavior has other things packed under it. Page 56 of the book. For instance, the motive may appear to be simple anger, but this anger could be due to problems at home. This practice is not to excuse behavior, but to help you understand the student and their behavior. This may lead to a need to seek out resources to solve problems that are out of your control. The student is next to acknowledge and list all of those affected by their negative behaviors and how. This can even be done by listing hypothetical people, such as people who could have seen this behavior and how it could have affected them. This cognitive process builds a sense of responsibility and empathy. Next, do not tell them how to repair the harm. Instead, guide them with open-ended questions until they determine a reasonable solution, such as apologizing to all of those who were affected. This can be done by way of Hack 1 or Hack 2 or other types of mediation. Last, reset the class by acknowledging the distraction but affirming the actions taken by the student to repair the harm before redirecting the class back to the lesson and reintegrating the student back into class. Reaffirming check-ins with the student involved is always a great idea. Hack 4 is a bit different than the old school way of disciplining and sounds a little worse than it is. Throw Out the Rules states that we should make it known what students should do rather than just stating what they are not to do. This requires a set of expectations or classroom norms to be established and understood by all. Norms are to be decided with feedback and ideas from students who should also provide input on the consequences of going against these norms. These norms are based on the individual classroom and what seems to be best to cultivate a successful classroom climate. To implement throwing out the rules, meet with the class and allow them, without your input, to make a list of class norms based on what they feel is the ideal classroom. This list should be narrowed down in order for it to be easily understood and attainable. If a student is misbehaving while the other students are acting appropriately, allow the misbehaving student to hear you thanking the others for their cooperation while ignoring the misbehavior. Once the misbehavior stops and they begin to cooperate as well, kindly thank them. Focus more on the behavior you desire out of students in order to reinforce this behavior. If this doesn't work, step 3 is to be followed. A restorative justice system should be established either school-wide or within your classroom, and it should be understood by all students. This system should involve consequences set early on that are enforced calmly and without bias. Step 3 that was mentioned earlier is to remind the entire class what expectations look like and exactly what they can do to be successful. Next, warn either the individual student or group of students rather than the entire class. This warning reminds them of the expectation, addresses the opposing behavior, and reminds them of the consequence. The example given on page 76 of the book is that you've plainly stated that students are to engage in productive work, and you have explained exactly how that should look. You see a student not following the directions, and upon questioning, she states that she has completed one part of the assignment. You thank her for her completion of this, but remind her that she is to remain productive during the remainder of class time, and that you would be disappointed to have to contact her guardians after she successfully completed part 1 of the assignment. After one warning is given and ignored by the student, the corresponding and unbiased consequences should be given. Hack 5 emphasizes a need for a growth mindset rather than the typical fixed mindset. The idea behind this is to build confidence to allow students to see their potential to improve or change. Over time, it is expected for students to hold one another accountable for maintaining this growth mindset and become better versions of themselves, further developing the community culture. A high school coach once said, "Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard," and I think this can be applied to many situations in life. Teaching students to have a growth mindset may seem difficult, but there is actually an activity which can make it fun and easier for students to understand. It involves students reflecting on an activity that didn't come naturally to them, but that they got better at over time and have now mastered. One example from page 89 of the book is riding a bike. Once the skill is chosen, have them map out the steps that took them from beginner level to their current level. Returning to the bike example, this could go training wheels, then coaster brakes, and now they are able to ride their bike with no hands. These steps are to be drawn out and shared in small circles with their peers. Explain that this belief that their abilities could be improved with practice is a perfect example of a growth mindset, and the same can be applied to work in the classroom. Hang the drawn progressions on the wall as reference and reassurance that growth through hard work is possible. The first step in implementing this is introducing and explaining the growth mindset. You can teach about and model zones of growth, which are comfort zone, challenge zone, and crisis zone. The book goes into more detail about these 3 zones, starting on page 93. Both you and students are encouraged to model and practice stepping out of your comfort zone regularly. Once the zones of growth are explained, each member of the classroom should recognize their own comfort zone, whether publicly or privately. You should also look at your own grading practices for anything that kills the growth mindset. Some examples are provided on pages 99 through 100 of the book and include taking points off for late work, not allowing retakes, averaging attempts from the original assignment and the redo, and grading work for accuracy on the first attempt. The growth mindset also stresses the importance of mastering the arts of planning and studying. Many people are not taught time management or even effective ways to study. Have high expectations, but also be understanding of mistakes or of the fact that students work and learn at different paces. Encourage students to work hard but not be afraid to ask for help. Because many people, and especially developing minds, lack self-awareness and regulation, Hack 6 revolves around mindfulness. Mindfulness has recently gained traction as studies have shown its success in restoring balance and gaining more control over emotions and behavior. Mindfulness works to teach students the difference between reacting and responding. It also teaches how to be self-aware and mindful if they experience a trigger. Hacking offers a framework on page 110 by the acronym PLAN, or PLAN. Before a student reacts to a trigger, they are asked to pause and be mindful of their breathing. Listen to their body and recognize emotions and physical symptoms, and ask how they can respond while also honoring their values. Then they are to move through the next steps while maintaining balance in the community. In order to implement mindfulness, determine the individual values of the students. This may require redirection that asks them to consider less physical and material items, such as characteristics, habits, and personality traits. Next, we must help students understand and strengthen their mind-body connection. Students who are aware of the physical reactions to their emotions are able to recover more quickly. This can be a discussion during the morning circle-ups if you'd like. Anytime a student expresses an emotion, encourage them to also consider the physical characteristics that come with that emotion. These physical symptoms can be warning signs once understood and reminders to stop, breathe, and think before reacting. Teach students how to recover once they recognize these physical symptoms. For instance, if a student's muscles become tense from being angry, they can slowly but repeatedly tighten and release them in order to soothe their sympathetic nervous system, as discussed on page 115. The book also encourages you to model empathy and address the person before the problem. Before reprimanding a student for going against expectations, ask a non-threatening and non-accusatory question such as, "Hey, what's up?" Or an observation such as, "You look kind of angry. Can you tell me more about that?" Once you address the person, then you can work on restoring expectations. Self-care should be taught and stressed by suggesting that students be more mindful of how they spend their time. This can be done with an activity such as a list of what they did, how long they did it, and then organizing that list into categories of replenishing, relaxing, and draining. Encourage them to be mindful and make more time for these replenishing activities. 3 easy steps in integrating mindfulness into the classroom are to normalize having and discussing emotions, making a habit of mindful breathing, and encouraging students to be aware of the negativity bias and attempt to pay more attention to positive thinking rather than negative. Step 1 can be implemented during circles by having non-judgmental discussions of emotions. It is also important to explain that all emotions are valid and are neither good nor bad. The second step can be used when transitioning from one subject to the next or during the morning circle. An example to help with the last step is using a daily gratitude journal. The hacks in this book work together and revolve around empathy, relationships, and responding with behaviors that are congruent with expectations. It has been found that students have trouble with empathy, so Hack 7 states that we need to help cultivate it. We do not need students to actually feel the emotions of others, but rather recognize and understand them. Therefore, the empathy we are looking to promote is called cognitive empathy. Empathy works by recognition of social cues to help realize the impact or harm of one's actions and behavior. This can be cultivated by having students interact with others they normally wouldn't. Activities to cultivate empathy should be designed to teach about body language, such as having students match body language or facial expressions to emotions or role play certain emotions. There could be fill-in-the-blank activities with effective statements, such as, I feel blank when blank because blank, like on page 133. Reflective listening should be taught and practiced by all regularly to build empathy through listening actively. One barrier of empathy cultivation is stereotypes. Be sure to actively reject these stereotypes, like by explaining why a joke is offensive and not acceptable, using an honest conversation. Bringing the human experience into the curriculum is also a great way to encourage empathy. Each school subject offers opportunity to bring up related lessons involving people from all walks of life. This also teaches students to connect lessons to the broader world. People from all cultures should be and feel welcome in the classroom. An idea is to allow students to showcase aspects of their culture that aren't usually displayed. With sensitivity in mind, give students the alternative assignment to adopt a famous family on which to present. Another way to cultivate empathy is to teach what it isn't. It isn't fixing anyone else's problems, but support is always encouraged. Empathy isn't giving unsolicited advice, which can be disrespectful and invasive. Lastly, empathy is not dismissing, minimizing, or invalidating someone's experience or feelings. Although saying, "it isn't a big deal," may seem as if you are reassuring, it is actually invalidating and can bring about shame and guilt. Hack 8 narrows in on the idea that multi-tiered school-wide policies are simply not enough. This hack proposes that restorative practices should be implemented to support each tier. Tier 1 involves the entire school. Some restorative practices that are suggested to implement here are restorative language, circle-ups being used in all classrooms, and clear, consistent, school-wide expectations to be in place. Tier 2's interventions are more targeted. Some restorative ideas for this tier are regular restorative mediations, allowing student participation in decision-making and repairing the harm, and encouraging a growth mindset. Tier 3 involves intervening at an individual level. Restorative suggestions here are creating an empathy-driven culture and encouraging all to adopt mindfulness, as well as a relationships-first motto. With the prevention of students moving up the tiers in mind, employ evidence-based practices and build rapport. Students should be greeted and checked in with upon arrival to school or classrooms. Regular individual performance updates should be documented. Accurate assessments, such as Positive Youth Development's evidence-based assessment titled 40 Developmental Assets, should be given to determine students' areas of need. Look for school-wide themes in the areas of need and analyze potential school-wide solutions. A tracking system is encouraged to help evaluate your solution's effectiveness. It is suggested to meet or talk with parents semi-regularly to update them on both positive and negative patterns observed. The idea behind this is that you work with the parents on helping the students succeed. In order to build restorative support, you need to first determine your school's weaknesses. Screening is helpful in this because it identifies at-risk students as well as any gaps in instruction. Progress should be monitored via a system to evaluate things you feel should be closely tracked. These can include regular documentation of attendance, subject mastery, and discipline. Maintain multiple tiers and their supports in your system, as previously mentioned, for the best outcome potential. Analyze progress monitoring. Continue using interventions that work and adjust them if not. A data assessment tool recommended by the book is Conover Online on page 154. The ninth and final hack listed by the book is to use data from proper and current record keeping to effectively track behaviors, coach students, and address recidivism. Academic and behavioral consequences should be clear and consistent. Students should be informed how consequences are measured and of any feedback that is acquired about said student pertaining to these consequences. In order to create a snapshot, first, staff needs to work together to identify problematic and expected behaviors. They also need to organize and develop a behavior committee. The behavior tracking system should start out rather small in order to straighten kinks as you go and before it becomes ingrained school-wide. Data is to be used to reflect and improve. The behavior committee should meet regularly, perhaps monthly, to discuss behavior trends and look for minor misbehaviors that oftentimes lead to major ones. Also, be on alert for bias exhibited by teachers and address it when made aware. Analyze data to determine the biggest offense and work with the behavior committee on solutions to decrease it. Hacking School Discipline lists 9 restorative practices or hacks that can be implemented in order to decrease negative behaviors school-wide and long-term. They are as follows. Hack 1, let's talk. Hack 2, circle up. Hack 3, repair the harm. 4, throw out the rules. 5, create a growth mindset. 6, teach mindfulness. 7, cultivate empathy. 8, build restorative support. And 9, create a snapshot. In conclusion, rather than the old outdated saying, children should be seen and not heard, Maynard and Weinstein's book proposes the idea that children and young adults need to be heard and understood. With this in mind, restorative practices create a recognition of behaviors, an obligation to repair the harm caused, and action steps in righting the wrong. As stated on page 80, students need coaching, modeling, and consistency in expectations in order to grow. We must be intentional in teaching skills to be successful and redirecting students when they make a mistake. They need to know what they should have done to be successful. Praise them when they do the right thing. Empathy should be taught so that students understand who their actions affected and the need to repair the harm. I know in this presentation I threw a lot of information at you all at once. However, if you want to do your own research or find out more about the book, authors, or any other resources, I provided some links that I can send out in an email. I would like to request from you that you implement these into your interactions with children in as many ways and as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.